tomorrow night. Meantime, stay with us now for Lateline. Good night.
Colonel Qaddafi and Saddam Hussein, America's two great bogeymen who won't go away. Tonight, America launched its latest offensive against Qaddafi's Libya.
Qaddafi and Libya are, in a sense, one of the last bastions of Arab radicalism. They are a source of support for anti-American and anti-Western movements more generally around the Arab world.
Now, the United Nations has used sanctions to isolate a defiant Libya after evidence of Libyan involvement in the Lockerbie air disaster. Targeting Qaddafi, that's our story tonight.
Live from Canberra, the ABC's Lateline. Here's Kerry O'Brien.
Welcome to the program. Tonight, America and its closest allies begin the process of trying to bring Libya into line. Sanctions on all air travel in and out of the country and a ban on all military sales. On the surface, they have a strong case. A timing device in the bomb that brought down the Pan Am flight over Lockerbie in Scotland has been traced back to two Libyan intelligence officers. The United Nations has demanded they be handed over and put on trial. But there is an apparent weakness in the American case. There's compelling evidence that two other countries, Syria and Iran, had an even greater role in the bombing, yet no action is proposed against either of those countries. So, is there a double standard? Tonight, we link one of Colonel Qaddafi's most senior officials, his ambassador in Paris, to a leading opinion moulder on Middle East affairs in the US, as well as the Arab League's elder statesman in Washington. But let's start with Andrew Fowler's account of the Lockerbie bombing and the international politics that surround it.
The bomb that destroyed Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie was made from a slice of Semtex explosive no bigger than a bar of chocolate. Semtex is the terrorist's ideal weapon. It's extremely powerful, yet almost impossible to detect using conventional security methods. The bomb was made by a fringe Palestinian group with its headquarters in Syria. Just before Christmas 1988, it was placed inside a suitcase on board an Air Malta flight to Frankfurt in Germany. From there, the suitcase went unchecked onto Flight 103, the Pan Am Jumbo made of the seas from London to New York. When the bomb exploded over Lockerbie in Scotland, it killed all 259 passengers and crew on board and 11 people on the ground. As police and forensic experts put pieces of the aircraft back together, the evidence pointed clearly to the bomb's manufacturers, the Syrian-sponsored group Ahmed Jabril's Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Council.
Painstaking and meticulous examination of debris has now led to the conclusion that the explosive device was within a radio cassette player.
It was the same kind of cassette player bomb seized by police when they'd earlier raided the Syrian group's West German headquarters. The evidence of a link to Libya was first raised in late 1990. At the time, the Syrians agreed to send troops to join the US-led opposition to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. The Libyan connection deflected the case which was building against Syria, a new ally of the United States. Instead, it put Libya in the dock. This is part of the evidence that the investigators say links Libya to the bombing, tiny fragments of a timing device. The US and Britain say they were custom made for Tripoli by a Swiss company.
Are you guilty?
Investigators say the bomb was planted by two Libyan intelligence agents, Abdul Basit Ali al-Maghrahi and Lalman Khalifa Fahima.
The evidence against Libya has never been presented in a court of law. There have been various intimations about the nature of this evidence, turning on essentially the timing device for the bomb. But we haven't seen this in a conclusive way because it hasn't been in a court.
At issue here is whether the international community is prepared to back up its own words with actions.
Last month, the United Nations decided to impose sanctions if Libya didn't hand over the two accused to either Britain or the US.
The Security Council decided to impose an embargo without having a conclusive test of the quality of the U.S. evidence, suggesting, therefore, political pressure on the part of the United States rather than on a reasoned assessment of the evidence at hand by the members of the Security Council.
As one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, China's vote was crucial. It had the right to veto, but it chose to abstain instead, after fears that it could lose its special economic relationship with the United States. It was the issue of pressure on countries like China to toe the American line that Libya took to the International Court in The Hague. Libya argued that Britain and the US used coercion to get the sanctions passed by the UN Security Council. It wanted the sanctions ruled illegal. But late yesterday, the court rejected Libya's case, leaving the nation isolated. Even its friends in the Arab League, an organisation of 7 Arab states, have failed to bring Libya in from the cold. Inside Libya, Gaddafi's come under strong pressure not to give in to the UN.
Gaddafi alone, I don't think, dictates policy. Gaddafi is in a situation of sharing power with some other powerful figures, the most important of which is Major Salem Jaloud, who staged the coup that brought Gaddafi to power in September of 1969, in a sense as a partner of Gaddafi.
It was that coup that set Libya on the road to a form of socialism based on oil money. Billions of dollars were spent on health, education programs and huge industrial projects to bring water to the desert. Louis Haddad is an economist at Sydney University. He's visited Libya twice.
Thanks to the oil wealth, the Libyans enjoy a very high standard of living. Better housing, better food, better medical services, and better working conditions than most Mediterranean countries.
He met Gaddafi during one visit.
Yeah, I find him also shockingly innocent of the ways of the West, of the way the Western powers conduct their foreign policies.
What kind of view does he have of the outside world?
Well, I mean, being a Badu, sort of background, has a black and white view of the outside world, I think, by and large. A very simplistic view.
Gaddafi's backed revolutionary movements around the world, run guns to the IRA and provided safe haven for a host of what he calls liberation armies. The United States has repeatedly accused him of international terrorism, and for more than 10 years it's been working to overthrow him.
Personally, I was involved in discussions with people who went into the Reagan administration in 1980, and their concern was, how are we going to destabilize Gaddafi and get rid of him?
Now the US sees its chance, but some nations are uneasy. 6 years ago today, US aircraft bombed Tripoli, killing dozens of civilians and wounding hundreds of others. At the time, the United States said the raid was a reprisal for the bombing of a discotheque in Berlin, which killed a US serviceman.
The evidence is now conclusive that the terrorist bombing of La Belle discotheque was planned and executed under the direct orders of the Libyan regime.
The trouble is, the US was wrong. The bomb was planted not by Libya, but by a Syrian, almost certainly a member of the same group that made the bomb that downed the Pan Am plane over Lockerbie. Syria had another partner in the Pan Am bombing, Iran, who paid $12 million for the operation. What these two countries have in common is that they were enemies of the United States. Now, after opposing Iraq in the Gulf War, they've drawn close to Washington. The only country that's not part of the US New World Order in the Middle East is Colonel Gaddafi's Libya. It's little wonder then that Tripoli stands alone in taking the rap for Lockerbie.
That report from Andrew Fowler. And now to our international hookup. In Paris, we have the Libyan ambassador to France, Saud Mujba. But I should say at the start that we've had some satellite problems with our link to Paris, and at this stage we still only have been able to get an audio line through. We're still waiting for our pictures to come through, but we'll persist anyway. The ambassador is one of Colonel Gaddafi's most senior diplomats, having served previously, and we've got that picture now, I'm pleased to say, as ambassador to Iran, Algeria, and now Paris. In Philadelphia, USA, we have Dr. Daniel Pipes, a former State Department official and Middle East specialist, a director of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and author of 8 books on the Middle East, including one called Friendly Tyrants, An American Dilemma. In 1988, he was an advisor to the Bush for President campaign. And in Washington, we have Professor Clovis Maqsood, who for 12 years until 1990 was the Arab League's ambassador at the United Nations and its chief representative in the United States. Today, he runs a research centre at the American University in Washington. Gentlemen, welcome to the program, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that this hookup persists. Daniel Pipes, what exactly are the US motives in driving this action against Libya?
The American motives are quite clear. To, in the short run, get the operatives who bombed the Pan Am plane, and in the long run, to make it clear that Libyan government is a rogue regime, a pariah state, and either must change or must be isolated.
So there are 2 agendas. There is the agenda that relates to the Lockerbie bombing in particular, and there is a second agenda to isolate Libya.
That's right. But more than to isolate it, to turn it into a pariah state, to turn it into a state to which, if you want to go, you have to take devious means. If you want to take money there, if you want to get arms there, you have to do it illegally. The whole business of dealing with Libya is, as of today, transformed.
And those motives justify such an extreme measure as international sanctions?
I don't know if it's extreme. It's actually quite moderate. There are 2 main prongs to it. One is no air traffic. And by the way, there will be air traffic because from what I can tell, the Libyan airlines will continue to move and nobody's going to stop them forcefully. And secondly, a ban on military arms going to Libya. Between the 2 of those, it's really quite modest when you consider how many steps could be taken against such a rogue regime.
Mr. Ambassador, your government obviously believes there must be some sort of case to respond to, or you wouldn't have gone as far as you have to offer the compromise of cooperating with an independent international inquiry.
Well, we have absolutely no doubt about the innocence of our citizens, but out of sense of responsibility, we have agreed to an impartial investigation. You cannot let the Americans be accuser, prosecutor, judge, and executioner at the same time. Their justice, as well as that of Britain, don't comfort anybody towards that aspect, and they might ask Jim McCloskey in Philadelphia whether I am saying the truth or not. Another very important reason, more important than that, is that legally we are not allowed to extradite Libyans. There is a specific clause in the Libyan law. The individuals involved refused to volunteer to go to America and Britain, but they are accepting and they are ready to go anywhere else and to submit themselves to any kind of independent investigation. But the 2 countries are not interested in an independent investigation because they will be without the fig leaf. They have no proof, and the only way to get it is to get these gentlemen and impose on them anything they want them to tell.
But what about the proof of that, of the device that traces back to Libya, that was a part of the bomb?
How's that?
What about the device which was a part of the bomb that blew up the Pan Am jet that has been linked back to Libya?
Okay, that is fine. If they have the proof, why don't they bring it to the world? You cannot say that you have the proof and keep it to yourself, because this is exactly what they said in 1986. President Reagan said that he had solid, irrevocable, irrefutable evidence that Libya was responsible for the bombing of the La Belle discotheque in Berlin. Now the Germans, who are allies to the United States of America and Britain and not to Libya, are saying that Libya had nothing to do with it. Instead of coming to us with apologies and with compensation, they come with additional, solid, irrevocable, irrefutable evidence. But they don't want to show it to anybody. If you have the evidence, it is much better for you to have an international investigation team, because then Libya cannot complain that this is an American lynching or scapegoating. The whole world would have known that Libya or the Libyans, whoever involved, are guilty, and therefore Libya cannot get any Arab, Muslim, or international sympathy whatsoever. But now it is getting the international sympathy, 300 million Arabs, 1.5 billion Muslims, the non-aligned movement, Everybody, 2/3 of the humanity refused to vote on that 748 at the United Nations.
Okay, but putting Lockerbie to one side for 1 second, I assume that surely you don't deny that Libya does have a long history of involvement in terrorism in various parts of the world.
I absolutely deny it. You have no proof to do it, but I have proof that America did it. You have said that we were responsible for Berlin, and now it's not true. You have said that we have killed the accused people, and this was not true. But I have the Frank Church report that investigated, when the Congress investigated the CIA, and there were 2 attempts on the life of de Gaulle. There was the coup d'etat in Indonesia. There was the coup d'etat against Nkrumah in Ghana. There was the killing of Patrice Lumumba. There was the Bayou-Pigs. There was the, and recently, the Chilean thing where 50,000 people have died. And recently, of course, 1986, you have violated us.
Okay,
and you keep
hang on.
camps
Yeah.
of individuals, Libyans, you have taken away from Chad, preparing them to fight their own country. These are the only terrorist camps I know of.
And Colonel Qaddafi didn't say in 1986 that he promised to train, arm, protect, quote, suicide and terrorist missions to help liberate Palestine?
No, that's not true. You keep claiming this all the time.
Yeah. Sorry, Daniel.
We are not shrinking from supporting the Palestinians. We support the Palestine. They have a legitimate cause. The United Nations supported them by 49 resolutions that you didn't see fit that they should be applied.
And Libyans have never shed an ounce of blood over Palestine?
How's that?
And Libyans have not shed 1 ounce of foreign blood over Palestine?
No.
Daniel Pipes.
Unless you want to explain it, unless you want to tell it. You just cannot make accusations without verification. If you had the proof, you would have given them to the whole world. You would have made a book. All you have is scenarios. All you have is accusations that you have never been able to substantiate. You will never be able to substantiate. But you think your word is Bible. What you say, the world must accept. That's not true.
Okay. Daniel Pipes, what do you say to that?
I wanted to add one point of information that Muammar Qaddafi, about 2 months ago, acknowledged in a speech that he had been giving aid to the Irish Republican Army. And in this speech, he said that he realized that the IRA was engaged in terrorism, which is something he hadn't realized before, and therefore he was cutting off his help to the IRA. But I point that out to say that...
the same thing. We were supporting the IRA.
For 20 years he was supporting
But when they went onto that bombing spree in London, long time ago, we have stopped it. We have supported Zimbabwe for gaining its independence. We have supported Namibia for gaining its independence. We have supported Uganda. Now, these people whom we have supported have been elevated to the status of heads of state, and we are being called terrorists. Why, when we support somebody in Angola for liberation, we are terrorists, and when you support UNITA, you're not? Why, when we support the Sandinistas, we are terrorists, and when you support the Contras, you are not? You are making the law because you are the only superpower in the world, and now you want to dictate to the world what is right and what's wrong.
You've made your point, Ambassador, you've made your point. Daniel Pipes, there is a point to answer, isn't there, about Ronald Reagan's assertions in 1986 on which he based his bombing raid on Libya, that the Libyans were responsible for that Berlin disco bombing, when in fact it turns out that they weren't.
There is a point. Indeed, the American government statement of exactly 6 years ago that it was the Libyans who were responsible turns out to be somewhat dubious. The key difference between then and now is that this time the American government wants to go to a court of law. That was not the case in 1986. And as you well know, and as your audience knows, we have an independent judiciary. And should the judge, should the jury find it unacceptable what the government is claiming, it will be thrown out. So we trust the American judiciary system, which has worked now for 200 years, basically well, much more than some hypothetical international commission who will be made up of God knows who.
But there is heavy politics involved in this, isn't there? And could you understand the Libyans in this instance being suspicious of whether they could really genuinely get justice in this instance and in these circumstances?
Of course the Libyans are suspicious, because in their own system there is no independent judiciary. They don't understand what independent judiciary is. The whole thing is rigged in Libya. Therefore they have a very hard time. I have full sympathy full sympathy that they can't understand that we have an independent judiciary. But you know, there are many cases in which the government is very eager to press a case, and indeed it gets thrown out.
Well, why is
it might happen this time.
Why is the U.S.
But the government can't.
Yeah, why is the U.S. and for that matter the UN not equally eager and keen to press cases against Syria and Iran for the Lockerbie
Because
bombing?
they don't have legal, because those are political cases and not legal cases. In this case, the U.S. government says it has a legal case based on the timing device, which it can take to a court of law and win. Now, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but it's not going to give away its evidence in advance. And it's not taking Iran and Syria to court because it doesn't have a court case against them.
But
we're talking now legal matters, not political ones.
So it's sheer coincidence that cooperation was needed from Syria and Iran in the war against Iraq, and that both are now important to the Middle East process? No hypocrisy,
Well,
no double standard?
When you're talking the political level, I would agree with you. I think there is something of a double standard. There is something of an interest in Libya that's greater than that in Iran or Syria, because Libya is an easy target. I agree on the political level. But on the legal level, there simply is no case against Syria. Were there a case against Syria, I suspect the U.S. government, despite its growing ties with Syria and its better relations with Iran, would pursue that as well. This is a legal matter, and generally the legal matters get followed regardless of the political consequences. That's one of the benefits of the American system.
But where you do have an acknowledged double standard, you must also concede that it's difficult then to automatically expect unanimous support for your position.
Well, first of all, it's not really a double standard. It's the emphasis on Libya is now because the Libyans have been caught with their hands guilty on two cases, not just Pan Am, but also in the French case.
Well, how strong is the evidence? How strong is the evidence in the French case?
It is also a legal case. It is a French...
These Libyans are accused and not guilty. Nobody has said any guilty. See, that's the difference. This is the trouble.
It's a French...
Every responsible person who spoke about it in your government or in the United Kingdom have said that these people too guilty. You have gone as far as asking compensations. Would you accept it in your own local laws that when somebody is accused of something, he should pay compensation first and then the court can take place 2 or 3 months later?
Ambassador, I have to interrupt because I'm told we're now about to lose the satellite to Paris. Just tell me this in what time you have left. How much will these sanctions hurt Libya?
They will disrupt life. They will make some people's life miserable, but they will not bring us down to our knees if that's what they expect.
I'm told there's a telex that says you've just been called into the French government. Are you expecting the prospect that you may be expelled from France tonight?
I have no idea what they will tell us. I know in some countries already the people have been notified, but the ambassadors have not been asked to go out. But if they want me to go out, I'm ready. This is my country. I go to my country with all the pleasure. If they feel that there's still room for the relations to be saved, and there's room, because when you have problems between countries, that's where they should be civilized enough to have people of goodwill to widen the margin of agreement and to narrow the margin of disagreement. But whatever they said, we will respect it, because this is a country in which I am a guest, and I will accept the hospitality, and when it is over, and my country is waiting for me.
Ambassador, I'll ask you to hold for a moment. I'll bring Professor Maqsood into this. Now, Professor, to what extent do you expect that the Arab League will support these sanctions?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that there is in the discourse that has emerged tonight on your television a sort of what Dr. Pipes represented, that we have trust in our judiciary. It is the growing discourse in the United States and the Western world towards the global South, or what used to be called the Third World, a discourse of patronizing and talking down to the peoples in the global South, and in the affirmation of total superiority of the judiciary system. We might agree or we might disagree on this matter, but it is the patronizing, provocative tone that is the power structure that is developing on the global level, where the United States can determine the agenda in the Security Council without taking into consideration the input of the region, can humble small countries like Libya or Iraq or others. But the problem is that between humbling a nation and humiliating a people is a component that has not been factored into the discourse in the United States, with the feeling of the new macho power that it possesses. Now, we understand that. We know that there is a so-called new global equation. I don't call it new global order because there's so much disorder as a result. And the problem that the Arab League wanted to do is that the Charter of the United Nations allows regional organizations to have the diplomatic option exhausted. The Arab League, where there are many friends of the United States and of the Western powers, has sought to explore all these options, and they were preempted by a level of decisiveness that the Western powers feel. Now, this is planting the seeds of a tremendous feeling of humiliation, because what is taking place in the Arab world is not so much an endorsement either of Mr. Qaddafi or an attack on him. It is a feeling that their vulnerabilities, their collective vulnerabilities, is being exploited in order to project Western power, while Israel, on the other side, can defy all sorts of United Nations Security Council resolutions, and there is a built-in Western deference to Israel that does not obtain to the Arabs. It's that psychological mood that translates itself into a level of political frustration that can be the prescription for a great deal of rebellion in the future, maybe not at the moment.
Well, tell me this, Professor. What danger is there for the United States that there will be a substantial backlash within the Arab, amongst Arab nations against the US and against the West as a result of these sanctions on Libya?
Well, there would be two levels of backlash. The backlash one time is the sense that they are vulnerable, and this vulnerability is being exploited to project the power of the West in an area where they couldn't project it, neither in Yugoslavia to resolve the question, neither in Ukraine or other places. This is the only area where the Arabs, because of the unfortunate divisions amongst them, feel that the United States and the Western powers can exploit it and isolate the Arabs from each other. That is why the Arab League was tested. It was not as successful as it should have been, unfortunately, because there is a level of dependency of certain Arab countries on the West that prevents the cohesion that the Arab League requires in order to make its decisions and its resolutions respected by the West. Now, that doesn't mean...
The important question is, to what extent will the Arab nations around Libya actually assist with these sanctions, and to what extent will they, in fact, sympathize with Libya and effectively defy the sanctions?
Well, you know, the Arab people and the Arab nations might have their controversiality about what President Qaddafi leadership is or is not. But they do have an instant solidarity with the Libyan people, so they will do anything they can so that the Libyans do not suffer the consequences of the sanctions that the Iraqis have suffered. That is the humiliating part, that there is a sense of underlying sympathy, but that doesn't mean an endorsement of the policies of regimes which they might approve or disapprove.
Might I jump in here and say that I have great sympathy as well for the Libyan people, but very little indeed for the Libyan government.
Well, that's
now,
you. That's you.
Let me speak now. You spoke. Mr. Maqsood is essentially apologizing for the Libyan regime. He's not worried about the Libyan people. If he were worried about the Libyan people, he would be very eager to see the last of Muammar Qaddafi.
I think Dr. Pipes is patronizing on... I mean, I think this is a racist attitude
sorry,
that
Professor,
taking, and
Professor,
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. We're getting close to time. We should allow Daniel Pipes the chance to respond to your points.
Well, he's spoken at the beginning quite a bit.
Yes, that's true, but he was also pitted against the Libyan ambassador.
But he is attacking me personally, and this is not true. Any sympathy for the Libyan people does not mean an endorsement of any regime. I said that there are people who endorse them and people who don't.
Okay.
And you don't know my attitude.
Okay. Daniel Pipes,
me of being apologetic.
Okay, Daniel Pipes, can I put this question to you? Is it really worth the kind of potential upheaval and backlash that is almost certain within the Middle East region as a result of these sanctions politically? Is it really worth it?
You're saying that it's almost certain. I'm much more skeptical. Remember, a lot of people were saying that it's certain that with the war in Iraq, there'll be a vast upheaval in the Middle East. Americans and other Westerners are being killed and so forth. None of this has happened. And indeed, one of the reasons it hasn't happened is because what we were doing was targeting an evil regime, that of Saddam Hussein's. Now,
on the Iraqi situation, there was an attack on an Arab country. This is an attack by the West, perceived to be an attack. They have attempted to explore all legal methods outside. So I think that it is a sort of intellectual terrorism to say that any sympathy for the Arabs becomes an endorsement of the regime.
Okay,
I'm
Professor,
saying quite the reverse. I'm saying
Daniel?
Quite the reverse. I'm saying a sympathy for the Arabs means having lack of sympathy for the regimes. I care for the Iraqi people, the Libyan people. I care very little for their governments. And indeed, I would take the reverse course.
Many people might agree with you on that, but you don't
Professor, I'm sorry.
impose
Can we just let him finish?
These are dictatorships. These are totalitarian regimes. These are not, in any case, democracies. And therefore, there is a deep division between the interests of the regime and the interests of the people. What the Western states have been targeting are the regimes, and I think rightly so, because these are not only evil regimes against their own people, but they're dangerous to the outside world. And that's what distinguishes states like Iran, Iraq, and Libya, is that they're not just harming their own people, but they're aggressive. They engage in terrorism, which affects people around the world, and therefore, unlike, say, the Yugoslav republics, they need to be dealt with from the outside.
Daniel
and
Pipes.
when Mr. Maqsood, yes.
Yep. Can I just ask you, in the limited time left, how far do you think the UN will go to enforce these sanctions, and what is the risk ultimately of military action?
I think they're really more symbolic than anything else, that they're not going to be enforced very stringently. I don't think they're going to be ratcheted up much further. But the key point, as I began with by saying, is that it turns Libya into a pariah state. It does not materially affect the way of life of the Libyans. After all, we're talking about arms and air travel. We're not talking about the fundamentals of life. But it is a very major step in terms of the psychology, as Mr. Maqsood is reflecting. It's psychologically a very important event.
Okay, now we are out of time, and I think that we did finally lose the Libyan ambassador in Paris. I think if he was still there, we'd have heard from him by now. That's
to be polite and wait until I'm given the chance to say something.
That's extremely polite of you, Ambassador. Let me allow you one last word, very briefly.
Speak about dictatorship, but I think what is happening now is that we are gradually building American dictatorship over the world, and my word for it, the appeasement of Munich is taking place all over again.
But Ambassador, you are a part of a government that is driven by a dictator. Is that not correct?
No, it is not correct, because we have the people. Did you ever hear of an ambassador saying that if my leader interferes with the Libyan law and extradites these two citizens, I will resign? You never heard it, and you will hear it. I've said it 10 times again, and I'm saying it now. What is going on in Libya is a people's democracy the world never had since Athens. But we are not given a chance. Nobody wants to hear us. Nobody allows us to say anything. You have severed all relations with us since 10 years ago. You lied to the whole world and told them, well, you are responsible for the Berlin bombing. Now your lie have been found out, and you are not sorry for it. You are not regretting it. You are not apologizing to it. You are not offering any compensation. On the contrary, you are asking for compensation from accused people. I think you should be worried. Ask about Jim McCloskey about your legal system. You in Los Angeles have made a girl of 14 years old to testify wrongly, to lie that 2 people admitted killing a policeman, and now after 17 years, Mr. Jim McCloskey get them out of jail after he got 12 other people from jail. Mr. Derek Bentley was hanged 40 years in Britain for a similar reason, and now it found out that they were not responsible.
Ambassador, nobody could say that you haven't had your say tonight.
Talk about being proud of your legal system.
Okay.
What pride are you have?
I'm afraid.
Hang when people go to jail for 17 years.
I'm afraid we're out of time. I don't even know if you can still hear me, but we're out of time. As I say, you've had your say tonight. Thank you for participating. To Daniel Pipes in Philadelphia, to Professor Maqsood in Washington. Thank you both for participating, and good night. Now let's find out what's making newspaper headlines here in Australia. The Financial Review says the rise in consumer confidence has led to caution in the mounting push for another Reserve Bank easing of monetary policy. The Australian also says the housing surge makes further cuts in rates unlikely. The Melbourne Herald Sun reports that senior Labor officials and some Victorian MPs want Premier Joan Kirner to call an election today. And the Sydney Telegraph Mirror features former New South Wales MP Terry Metherell sunning himself on a Pacific island while the storm continues over his appointment to a plum government job. That's all from us tonight. Tomorrow we return to a man who provoked a big response when he appeared on Lateline a few weeks ago, Paul Davies, an internationally renowned physicist whose book, The Mind of God, argued that the latest discoveries and theories about the universe pointed to the existence of a grand design. We had many requests to follow up the issues he raised, and since tomorrow's Easter Thursday, we thought it might be appropriate to do just that. So we've brought Paul Davies back with an atheist science philosopher and a prominent theologian. Join us tomorrow, and thanks for sticking with us through our satellite problems tonight. For now, good night.
That the explosive device was within a radio cassette player.
This monstrous brutality is but the latest act in Colonel Qaddafi's reign of terror.
Louise Johnson, an Australian virtuoso crossing musical boundaries, playing her own interpretations of famous works.